So I want you to look closely into the eyes of the people I am showing you on screen now. Look at these pairings. Every Aryan has a Jew. Every light eye has a dark eye. This is a core inbuilt reality of our world today. These pairings, a light with a dark. You can see this in artistic and business partnerships like Hall & Oates. You can see this in frenemies like you see in Euphoria. But most importantly, you see this in relationships, marriages, as depicted by Neo and Trinity, or as depicted by Darcy and Elizabeth. There is always a light eye and a dark eye. This is not just in media either, this relational pairing, but this is part of real life. If you look around at the relationships in real life today, you will see this pairing. You will see this in older couples. You will also see it in very young couples, even teenage couples, even couples in high school. And this is intentionally done to mix bloodlines. Now you might say, oh wow, what a crazy thought, what a crazy idea. But I encourage you to simply look around at your reality. See for yourself these pairings. Notice who wears sunglasses. Notice who shows their eyes. And it's not just relationships. It is full ecosystems built around light eye individuals. I was born into this system. From elementary school, the friends I was given, the boys that were chosen to be in the same class as I was, were dark-eyed. When I went to middle and high school, it was the same. The person that I would consider my high school sweetheart was dark-eyed. Now, did all of those children that I grew up with, did they know this was happening? They don't have to know, because there is a system and movers in the background making sure that these pairings happen. So the big question is, why? And how? How did this happen, and why did it happen? Where did this start? So, the most important pairing was when the true line of the British throne sold their birthing rights to the banking cult. When the British royal family in the 1800s, once again, sold their birthing rights, their birthright, to the bankers, they signed a contract that allowed for this world to occur. That's what happened. The British royal family, the true bloodline family, signed some pieces of paper that gave a false family, also a single family, control over the throne and control over the birthright of the British people. And they signed those papers, and then what happened? Well, they came across the ocean to America to let everybody know in America, hey, we're in charge now. But there were some British countrymen in America, British descendant free Americans living in America who didn't quite give two fucks what papers the crown had signed, and weren't too keen on this new setup. And so the Civil War begun. That was anything but civil. And so since then, we exist in pairs. For the good of the stolen British crown, for the good of the usurpers, for those who created a deceit and a contract, a dead law, and then believed they could bind living men for hundreds of years under paper, dead law. But we must never forget that we do not exist under the dead law. We are living men under God's law, the law of the living God. This law, the selling of the birthright, was always dead. It has no power in the kingdom of the living God. For it is God, not man, who judges. The thieves of the British crown have bound my people by a dead law. But these dead laws have no power over living men. So how did this happen? Where did these deceivers come from? Where did this all begin? Well, they tell us. I believe it began in Egypt. I believe they were slaves in Egypt, and I believe at that time they were of black skin. And they toiled under the Pharaoh, and they hated the Pharaoh. And when they eventually were delivered, they moved into Canaan. They passed Mount Sinai and moved into Canaan, and they began to war with the tribes that were there. And they began to learn the ways of deception, learn the ways of deceit, learn the ways of blending in. And they never forgot this victim mentality of being the slaves of the Pharaoh. And this became a deeply ingrained element into who they were. And they believed that their sins were always going to be forgiven because of what they had endured in the past. And so they moved from Egypt into Canaan, and then through the Mediterranean Sea, through Turkey, into Italy, into Germany, and ultimately into Great Britain. And then they crossed the ocean over into the Americas. And over time, their skin blended because they wanted to blend. They wanted to gain power, and they wanted their power to seem legitimate. And therefore, they had to blend in. But the eyes are the windows to the soul. And they could never escape the truth of who they were. And so they had to hide and use perception games to twist and deceive and use the contract dead laws to bind the living men. And so in the 1800s, when the British Crown, degraded by their sin, by their greed, by their lust, by their ambition, by their decadence, the true British Crown sold away their birthright because of their weakness. And that changed everything. And it changed America. It changed Europe. It changed the world. Because it changed the entire British Empire. Because, see, America was never truly separated from that British Empire. We were never separated. And this is again why I rail against democracy. Because at the end of the day, what happened? A royal family, one royal family, made a decision, fell to the dead law, and a usurping family was put in their place, and the entire kingdom suffered. And so I asked the men of Great Britain, how long will you be bound under a dead law? Where is the rightful heir to the British throne? Because as long as the kingdom has no king, we will all suffer.